There are some truths that are clearly self-evident. If a sick cow goes to market, we want to know about it. We want to know which farm it came from, which cows it came in contact with, and we want to know all this information very quickly. But implementing a database management system for every cow in the country is a monumental task. Good morning, and welcome to Technophiles. One of our newest professors here at Missouri University of Science and Technology has been studying this problem. Here's our host, Wayne Huebner, to introduce him to you.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of Technophiles. This is your host, Wayne Huebner, Chairman of Material Science here at MissouriS&T. We're joined by a very special guest this morning coming from the English and Technical Communications Department. I'm joined by David Wright. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Dave, you're an assistant professor, correct?
That is correct.
How long have you been on campus now?
Well, I got to Rolla in July, so I've been here, almost 8 months now.
Wow, you're actually setting some kind of record then for being on this show. I know Mindy must have did a great job finding you because I think the subject matter that you're looking at is a quite an interesting blend. I think between I'll say the art side of the equation and the engineering science.
Well, Mindy's been good to me, so I wasn't surprised. But it is one of the nice things about technical communication is that it is so interdisciplinary. You can take I wouldn't say a more artsy approach, but certainly a more humanistic approach to some of the more technical aspects of society and the new technologies being developed at a place like MS&T now, not UMR anymore.
Excellent. Well, Dave, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. If I understand correctly, you're taking your expertise and helping apply it to industries that have communication problems with respect to perhaps establishing a new policy or a new way of doing things, and then trying to make sure that it filters all the way down to where the rubber hits the road, the end user or the end producer.
That's a good description. What you'll find in especially very high-tech industries or very low-tech industries is that information tends to, it doesn't necessarily move in a straight line. It sort of meanders about almost like a river. The people that pass it along tend to interject their own biases and opinion to that information as it travels, and it's almost like the game you play in kindergarten. Someone whispers something into someone's ear, and it moves around the room, and by the time you get to the end where the receiver that's supposed to be able to utilize this information, it's often been changed or never reaches them at all.
So the example you've been working on concerns itself with the United States Department of Agriculture.
That's right.
And their interest in having a tagging system for tracking all the cattle?
Cattle. Well, that was the main focus, yes. There were a lot of people that were very concerned that they would have to tag their dogs and cats and this sort of thing, but that was never really the plan. The plan would have been to track cattle as they move through the supply chain from the small farmer who might have 20 or up to 50 animals, track that through the various sale barns, livestock marketing arenas, through the feedlots and so on until eventually they would reach the harvest point or the packing plants. And the idea being that if you had that system in place, you could trace any disease outbreaks quickly that might occur. And you might also get some other benefits out of that, such as supply chain data and more information on who the producers are and that sort of thing.
So the government then's interested in basically barcoding these cattle when they're born?
It's almost like that. It's almost like checking out at the supermarket, yeah.
Okay, so how do they tag an animal? I mean, I can imagine, I've seen cattle, of course, with ear tags on, but that doesn't seem very permanent.
Well, there are several methods of tagging the ear, tags that are more permanent, that are a radio frequency ID tag. And basically you can scan those with a wand. It's very quick, and that information is automatically stored in a database of some type. Of course, when you've got millions of animals moving constantly, things get a little more complicated because they move from place to place, often frequently. So it can be hard to keep up with. But the actual scanning of the animals is not difficult. They can even run through, if you've ever, certainly you wouldn't have done this, but some people leave a store with something they haven't paid for. The thing goes off and beeps and all of that, and they can be scanned even that way. With one thing on either side, you run them through and it picks up the information.
You're assuming a lot, Dave. My picture is up at the post office. But
I think mine's up a couple of places too.
actually, we've got a center on campus that over in the electrical engineering department called the Intelligent Maintenance Systems Center, where they use RFID technologies to help track the manufacturing of fighter aircraft, where all the parts will be scanned in, and then they're even figuring out ways to spatially locate these things to help coordinate or orchestrate the assembly line process. Because something like a jet aircraft, it's sitting still; it's not moving. You're bringing parts to it.
Right.
So anyway, when a cow is born, they put one of these RFID tags under its skin.
That would be the plan.
Okay, that's the plan, and that was the USDA's plan, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more now about how what's the relationship between the USDA on one hand, who's very interested in being able to track all these cattle, because I assume issues related to mad cow disease and things that could be a potential disabling event for a very large industry,
right?
All the way down to the small cattle producers like you've described. How would they find out the need to do something like this?
Well, that's really the question, and there is no easy answer. But what's been done thus far clearly hasn't worked. The USDA is very fond of using technology like the internet to communicate with large numbers of people, to put documents out, to put new statistics out. The problem is that most of the people that are keeping, well, not most, but a good percentage of those people that are keeping small numbers of animals are from a generation that really predates the internet, and they don't understand the internet, and they don't want to, a lot of them. And so when you're displaying this information and dispersing it through these highly technical means into an industry such as the beef industry that's not a highly technical industry, you run into these problems right away. So if you can't do it that way, you have to turn to more traditional methods, which is, person-to-person communication. You can distribute written materials. But again, and this is something that technical communication involves all the time, those materials have to be written so that the people who are receiving them can understand them. And a lot of times, when these two worlds collide, for example, one vocabulary doesn't fit the other very well, so to speak. So, as soon as you said the word database, you've already gone beyond a lot of the technical expertise that exists. That's not, and I've always make the point that a lot of people in the agriculture industry are making a lot more money than I am and will continue to do so. It's not that they're unsavvy. It's just that they're two different industries. So anytime you have two different industries coming together like this, and this goes well beyond agriculture or computer technology, anytime you have two industries moving together, there are going to be communication problems. And as I said before, a lot of this goes back to the USDA trying to communicate their information really before having a consensus on the matter. In the beef industry, there are a lot of industry alliances, such as the Livestock Marketing Association, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, that are very powerful. And a lot of people go directly to these alliances for information instead of the USDA because of I guess you could say, a history of mistrust there.
And is it also true that the USDA doesn't approach them, to help disseminate information?
Well, they do. In this case, though, I would say that they didn't approach them with a fully conceived plan. They went to these alliances with part of a plan. And the alliances then all started to decide that they would fill in the blanks, except all the test answers didn't match up, so to speak. The different alliances all had different solutions, and they began to sort of vie for control of this system. And so then you have their members, whether it be a small producer may be going to the NCBA for information. An owner of a livestock market where these animals are sold is going to the Livestock Marketing Association. And all of these associations are now taking this information that came from the USDA and they're spinning it for their membership so that their own goals and agendas are protected. And so the members of those organizations then, in the end, are not necessarily getting the information that the USDA wanted them to get. By now it's been
perturbed.
Exactly. It's been polarized to some degree on all fronts. So now you have these different groups of people with different information, with different agendas. And by now, a year later, no one trusts anyone. Everyone thinks they should be in control of this thing. And the communication that should have taken place and made this very simple has instead become a huge technological mess, and now no one has the answer, and we're all fighting about what to do about it.
This is really interesting. If you'd asked me before talking to you, how are things going in this industry, I would have said, wow, they must be going pretty well, because every once in a while I will hear about some cow that they traced back through Lord knows how many owners and how many miles down to which stall they were born in. I thought, my gosh, I can't believe how they can track that. They can't even track me that accurately. But those are obviously examples where maybe purposely they wanted to be able to broadcast just how much they have their act together and can track things. But the reality is far from that.
It can be done, and especially in a situation that's sort of prearranged, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But in practice, the last major mad cow disease outbreak, the source never was determined, and they spent months trying to track it down. Mm-hmm. So there is a need for a system of this kind, but it's very technical, and would require significant hardware and skill upgrades in this industry, which naturally nobody is willing to pay for. Not even the USDA. They've never have put out a financial plan to back this up. And, so the question becomes, how can you manage these communication networks and get that information, first of all, to the people who need it, and secondly, in a form that they can understand? Mm-hmm.
So where do you come into the picture then, David? You're analyzing, in this particular instance, where things have broken down, I assume, and you've been describing them. How would it have worked? What should they have done to improve this communication linkage such that it probably took a lot more time to do so, get the right people on board first and let it filter down slower, or what?
That would have been a much better approach. One thing I noticed as I visited approximately 50 of these livestock markets between, basically from South Texas up into North Dakota. And the one thing I was amazed at everywhere I went is, even after all of the USDA's efforts to promote this, I was just how many people had no idea how such a system would function, how it would work, what it would mean for their individual business. They were just, after a couple of years of really intense promotion, still very much in the dark. So I think that what that goes to show is that that information wasn't getting there. And if it was in a form that made them sort of not pay much attention. Mm-hmm. Sort of a lot of times the industry alliances will say, if something doesn't suit the agenda that they're interested in, or doesn't think it suits their needs, they'll just sort of turn their membership off, so to speak, to the subject. Say, ignore this. We're on top of it. don't worry about this until we let you know to worry about it. So
do these alliances, do they print newsletters that go out to all their members and all these producers all the time?
They do, and they're much better at keeping track of their membership and the people that they do business with than the government is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anytime you have a program like this that's government sponsored, there will be some who are against it just for that reason. I had a couple of people in South Texas tell me point blank that this was an IRS plot to discover how many cattle they had so they could tax them more heavily on these animals. So, there's some, and it wasn't just in Texas. I found that in some parts of the country, people just aren't interested.
But what they said is probably true, right? I mean, if all your cattle were registered in that manner, someone probably could push a button and know exactly what.
There's a lot of concern about that, and especially among these industry alliances, they want to know who's controlling this information and who has access to it. A lot of the small guys think it will be used by the big guys to drive them out of business because they can now, gather pricing information and that sort of thing. And you see, none of this was communicated right from the start. That's sort of what I'm getting around to in a very long fashion. As I traveled and figured out that no one had any idea how this was going to work, who was going to be in charge, how this technology would be used or even set up, what is a database? That's where you sort of have to start here. I just began to realize that this should have been handled from the beginning. What happened was this information went out with a lot of ambiguity in it. And it would be the same, when we talk about communication networks or technology diffusion in technical communication, it's always the same. The information has to be there, and it has to be tailored to a certain audience, or one of two things will happen. People will either ignore you because they don't understand it, or they will fill in the blanks based on their own desires, right? So the problem was at the very beginning. But if you had been able to gather that from the beginning and create a clean start, then the thing to do would have been to identify these communication networks as they exist. Instead of trying to go around them, use technology to circumvent them, the thing to do would have been to identify them as they exist and then use them as is, so to speak, to disseminate that information.
Mm-hmm. David, do you think it's too late? I mean, it seems like we've gone pretty far down the road, and I can imagine that some of the things you said are very polarized. People are just going to dig in their heels and say, "I'm not going to do it."
I don't know that it's too late. I think that at this point there would have to be a significant economic reason to make it happen. I think that the fighting and the misinformation and the power struggles have become so deep. They've just really further. They've just worsened the mistrust that the beef industry has for the USDA, or had to begin with. So, I don't know. I don't think it's impossible. I think it will happen at some point. I just think that the communications have been so mismanaged at this point that we're a long way from it.
Can you think of some advantages that a small producer would have in participating in this program, besides just being told you have to do this, as compared to, hey, this is what it can do for you, as far as helping out with immunization records or things that you might want to know?
Sure. All of that, of course, depends upon the sharing of information along this, what you would have to call a virtual supply chain. In other words, you would have individual databases at each stop, so to speak, not necessarily at the farm, so to speak, but you might have them at the sale barn, at feedlots or stocker ranges. And you would have them at packing houses. And so if this information traveled up that chain and down as well, then a small producer could say, learn, what percentage what percentage his animals dressed at, which is just another way of saying how much usable meat was there on that animal. And potentially things about what feed combinations are producing the best animals, what veterinary combinations are producing the healthiest animals. I mean, there are advantages to be had, even for the small person. But I think it would have to be a very transparent process, technologically anyway. It'd have to be easy to use, have to be clear that everyone could see what everyone else was seeing, and it would have to be very clear who was in control of all of this data.
David, have you approached the USDA yourself?
Well, I've spoken with some of their staff. I have not. My study has been more involved with the on the ground, so to speak.
Sure.
I've been much more involved with the potential users of this system, potential customers, than I have the USDA. I have not approached them, but I certainly would talk with them.
Well, it strikes me that you know quite a bit that could be of a lot of use to them, actually.
Well, we'll see.
David, now, who sponsored this work? I mean, obviously traveling all over the country like that and visiting 50 livestock auctions, et cetera, that was a lot of time and investment there.
It was, and at the time, I worked for a company who was actually, this company was actually developing software for this very need. You have to remember that when Animal ID was first proposed, the plan was for this to be a mandatory system. It was not going to be optional. So, they were so confident originally about this that they were just going to legislate it. That's before, of course, all the problems I've described occurred. But I was really traveling throughout the country, just gathering information to see what would be needed in a software package. At what level of operation would this need to be? What kind of data would need to be there? Who would want that data? How would they enter it? Who would enter it? All these, there are staff members at each of these auctions that would have to be involved in controlling and entering the data. So, it wasn't until really I started to see that no one had any answers for me. That's when sort of the researcher took over, and I started looking at this from another angle. What's going on here? Why does no one know?
Fascinating. I can imagine when you were interviewing people, I'm sitting here thinking in my head, "Hi, I'm David Wright. I'm an English professor from UMR." Can I ask you some questions? They'd probably look at you like, get lost. But
some did, and some said, "Come on in," and some just laughed. You never knew. But the beef industry, it's a close-knit bunch. It's a small community, and it's not an easy place to just walk in and say hello and expect people just to start chatting up a storm with you. So I had to really sort of preface all of my questions but with an explanation of what I was doing there.
Do you have a cowboy hat and boots and such too?
Not anymore. I did it one time. Now you've got to have some kind of boots if you're going to be hanging around those places. You don't need your sneakers out at the sale barns. You'll find out quickly.
Yeah. Well, David, I want to thank you for being on today's edition of Technophiles. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Again, we were joined by David Wright. He's an assistant professor of English and Technical Communications here at MissouriS&T. David, we're glad you're a faculty member here.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
You've been listening to Technophiles, a program heard every third Friday at this time. Your host for the show is Dr. Wayne Huebner, chairman of the Materials Science Department at MissouriS&T. Technophiles is produced to the studios of Public Radio KMST with help from Mendy Limback and Chuck Knapp. If you'd like to hear this or any previous edition of Technophiles, just go to our website at www.kmst.org. I'm John Francis. Join us next month at this time for another Technophiles.